It's podcast time. This is the Solid Signal podcast for the week of October 10th, 2016. And the subject for this week's podcast is, how can it possibly be that so many antennas look so different from each other, and how can they all still possibly work? It's a great question, and I want to start with a little bit of a parable, because I do have a few minutes to fill. A long, long time ago, when I was in my early teens, I came to the conclusion that car design had advanced as far as it was possibly going to advance. As a matter of fact, I decided that there was one car that represented the perfect design for a four-door sedan. And all other cars really were just kind of riffs on that. This was the quintessential design for a four-door sedan, and I had to wonder at that point, how could things go any further? Because, let's face facts, it had been done. I'm a little ashamed to say that that particular car was the 1984 Oldsmobile 98. You can Google it for yourself. As it came out in 1983, it is not the pinnacle of design that I thought it was. The lesson to be learned from that story is that there are many different ways to satisfy what is essentially the same need. And one thing that I can tell you about antennas is that if you're thinking that they can't possibly all look as different as they do, what you're ignoring is that under the skin, many of them do, in fact, look the same. If you're talking about a smaller antenna, not a roof-mounted antenna, essentially you're talking about a dipole. A dipole is a piece of metal that is formed into a loop, or into a line, or into an X. These different configurations are used to capture different frequencies strongly. And really, if you take a look at whether it's a paper-thin antenna or the kind of antenna that's posted on your wall or just kind of what looks like a sort of monolith, all these antennas are really dipoles. I don't recommend you dissecting them unless you're interested in buying a new one, because they're not all designed to be taken apart. So just take my word for it that they're a lot more similar on the inside than they look on the outside. And that describes a lot of the confusion that you all may have. Secondarily, I think that, what a great word, secondarily, I think if you look at what an antenna is needed to do, what it's designed to do, you'll see that obviously you're going to have bigger antennas to try to get further, more distant signals, and smaller antennas where you're just going to have signals that are local, and that accounts for some of it too. A lot of antennas, the big ones, fall into the category of Yagi antennas or log periodic antennas, where what they're doing is trying a number of different tactics to focus as much signal as possible on the receiving elements. If you look at a very large antenna, it's possible that the receiving element itself may not be very big, and everything else that you see is just designed to focus signal on that one point. You'll see this especially with the Televez line of antennas, where the actual receiving part is about 7/8 way toward the back, and there's reflectors and directors and posts, and this is very common for modern antennas today. However, if you need an even more powerful antenna for much lower frequencies like VHF, you often find that large kind of traditional Yagi or log periodic design that you see on roofs of older houses. That design was dictated really by a need for low-frequency VHF, and also that was the technology that was available at the time for manufacturing. That's how they could afford to make stuff. They couldn't afford to use fancy design tools like the computers we have today to discover exactly how easily you can direct signals from place to place. So surprisingly, it does actually kind of come down to a fashion choice. What antenna fits best in your home? What antenna works best with your homeowners association requirements? What antenna is actually going to be the one that your significant other can stand? That's only part of the choice of antennas, but it does help to explain why they all look so incredibly different, because, hey, different strokes for different folks. That's it for the podcast for me for this week. I hope you'll continue listening, and until I see you next week, have a great one.